7 myths British people believe about America. Let's get into it.
But these myths go way beyond the absence of quintessentially British food. And so now that I've lived here for about a seventh of a century, it's time to outline some of the myths that us British believe about America and Americans. This is a funny one because I think television gives us this notion that Americans do all live in giant houses like the McAllisters do in Home
100%.
Alone, but it's not entirely the case. Sure, I mean, statistically, America...
Right, okay, firstly, shout out to like Tim and people from here who have gone over to my Twitch and started watching me on Twitch live every day. Probably live now, so go check me out over on Twitch, as you see above. But yeah, like, even you guys posted your house in chat. You all live in what looks like an absolute mansion to me. Like, compared to my house, you all live in mansions. Like, these are mansions.
American houses are on average larger than their UK counterparts. There are a number of reasons for this, which I outlined in this video. But to say that all Americans live in really large houses is a complete fabrication of anything resembling the truth. And I was a good example of this before I became a YouTube sensation, because when I first moved to Chicago, we had to do things on a budget. Between me and my wife, we weren't making a great income, and this is a major city, so we had to sort of settle for an apartment whose dimensions were 300 square feet. And for those of you who don't know, that's about the size of a shoebox, roughly. You know, we had to leave our shoes outside the door. That's how small it was. And it is worth...
One thing about America, Americans apparently always wear their shoes inside, as we've seen in a different video. Is that true though? Do you wear your shoes inside a lot? Because again, some of my Twitch viewers have said, like Kevin, that they wear their shoes inside.
Of living in the United States does fluctuate massively across the country. When I lived in Indiana, just one state over, we were paying about $530 a month. That's basically unheard of in Chicago. And it's certainly unheard of in New York City, which of course was the...
I think New York is the one exception, that you live literally in this size room right here. This room is where you would live. It's not big, but you would live in this room. 100%. Yeah.
City in which the show Friends is set, and I think it's shows like that gave us this impression that Americans were all living in big apartments. And speaking of houses, I was alerted to a tweet recently from a British person who couldn't believe that American addresses go way up into the thousands, and their belief on this was that every street in the United States has thousands of houses on it. And this was a belief that I used to have, because the country is absolutely massive, so you almost expect it to house that many.
It makes sense, but I feel like my almost like knowledge would say that is not true. Like, even from movies, they don't have thousands on them. But
many people. But the thing is, there are way fewer people in this country per square mile than there are in Britain, so it doesn't add up. And that's when I got looking into it. And in a previous video, I outlined it doesn't really work like that. On any given street, they don't start at the number 1 and then end at 10,000. Often, and it's the case here in Chicago, you'll usually have a string of houses, for example, all in the 6,000s on a given street. And that's because it's about 6 miles from the center of downtown. 1 mile in from that, they're all 5,000s. Another mile, they're all 4,000s, etc., etc. Now, not every city in the US does it from the center of the city. It could be from another part of the city or just some other central point. But that's sort of a general rule for how the numbering works on US houses. This one comes up again and again, that the United States is such a young country that it basically doesn't have a history. And I've always thought...
Right, firstly, from the video we watched, we saw the story of the American national anthem. Just from watching that, I now know that ain't true. But in a way, before that, I obviously knew you guys had a history. Like, everyone's got history, but I didn't think you had that vast of a history like the UK does.
Part of this perception of America to be quite a lazy one, because even if you go back to 1776 through to the present day, yes, it is a shorter...
The way you just said through.
One. Because even if you go back to 1776 through to the present day, yes, it is a short amount of time in comparison to the history of Britain, but think about all of the insane things that happened in that period. And even if you ignore all that, there's one thing that we tend to forget because we don't get taught it very deeply in Britain, and that is the thousands of years of native history that happened before we even turned up. I was absolutely blown away, not literally, that would be weird, when I went to Cahokia Mounds here in Illinois. Many, many hundreds of years ago, Cahokia Mounds used to be a native city, and it had about 20,000 people people, which might not sound like a lot by both American and British standards, but back in the day, that was more than London. And I once read about this volcano eruption that happened in present-day Oregon a few thousand years ago. And this eruption was witnessed and recorded.
You guys are going to hate me. You have volcanoes? I did not know that. Wait, what? Are there volcanoes in the US? I need to know this. I need to know this. Are there volcanoes in the US? No, I knew you guys had volcanoes, 100%. I knew that.
Recorded by Native Americans who were in the area at the time. And long story short, they basically saw the origins of Crater Lake, which is absolutely huge.
Just very quickly from me, guys, I'm live almost every day over on my Twitch. Hell, I'm probably live right now, so go check it out. Also, if you do want to support my dream of becoming a full-time content creator, there is a donation link in the description. Don't feel like you got to donate. It's just a way you support if you like my content.
This one is embarrassing. For me,
the US and Canada are basically the same. I wouldn't say the same, but I think they're pretty similar.
Because years ago, I believed that Canada and the United States were basically the same country. And the reason that I believe that is, number one, I was 12, so cut me some slack. And number two, my only sort of exposure to both countries was through the people, was through the way they spoke. And to my young ears, which couldn't yet differentiate these two accents, Macho Man Randy Savage and Bret Hart basically had the same accent, just with an entirely different timbre. And that's all I had to go on. And I think it's what a lot of British people have to go on, because I still occasionally see those comments. Oh, what is the difference between Canada and America? Or is it essentially that one has Mounties and the other doesn't? And it's only since I moved here that I've become super aware of the substantial difference between the two countries. Completely different healthcare systems, completely different food, completely different use of English.
What different healthcare systems do you have? I thought it would be the same in US and Canada. Someone tell me in the comments, what different healthcare systems do you have?
English. Right, in Britain we call it the loo, in America they call it a restroom, in Canada they call it a washroom. And I've seen all manner of different examples of that kind of thing. In America they don't celebrate Boxing Day, in Canada they do. The Canadian dollar is different to the American.
Don't celebrate Boxing Day. What?
Dollar. In some ways they go with British English in places that America doesn't. And now that I'm older and I've listened to some of the regionalisms throughout the United States, even the way Americans speak is different to how Canadians speak. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but these differences certainly go way beyond how the two countries pronounce the word about. I've touched on this before, but I couldn't really...
I would say loud, but they talk a lot, which I guess makes them loud.
Do a video without including it in this list. This perception that Americans are loud and
by the way, which I think is a good thing, because I'm the same.
Boisterous. And I can understand on some level where that comes from, because I think the way Americans speak, it comes from a different part of the throat. So it's a bit more projected, right? Whereas us Brits, it's more sort of, I don't know, understated a lot of the time. I think another reason that we think Americans are loud is how they present themselves in films. There might even have been a time in my life where I thought all Americans were loud just because Jim Carrey was. He's Canadian, isn't he? He is Canadian.
Mate.
And culturally speaking, I definitely have found that Americans speak at a higher volume when they're in restaurants together. But there are so many other examples of the opposite being true. On match day, after we've had a pint or six, you know, we're singing the songs of our team who we love because they happen to be situated in the town that we were born in. And it's just what we do when we leave a nightclub, which, you know, I haven't done in 20 years. But when we did, you know, I'd be on the street yelling at traffic cones because that might have just been me. But what I'm saying is, when we get drunk, we very much give Americans a run for their money. There's a loud person in all of us, right? And once we free ourselves of our inhibitions, we can let out all of the decibels we want. That's not a call to action. It's merely an observation. This is only funny, not because of the image of Americans walking around with bumbags on, but it's because we call them bumbags and you call them fanny packs, and it's bloody hilarious. It is also partly the visual, because bumbags have never been cool, but this notion, which I occasionally...
I must say I hate them.
occasionally read that Americans are just always walking around wearing one is very laughable, especially as somebody who's lived here 14 years. So it's quite dumbfounding, this one. I'm not saying that all British people think this way, but the ones that do, I'd be very interested to hear, do they think that way because they met an American in 1994 and they've just held on to that belief? Or are American tourists still wearing bum bags? Do people carry cash? But I can tell you this, I don't have a bum bag / fanny pack radar, right? I am not constantly surveilling the populace to see whether they do or do not have a fanny pack. But my feeling is I don't remember seeing one in a while. So I think this is one very time-specific stereotype that can now be laid to rest, all right? And yes, I thought I'd include one that was quite topical, not just because we are in the autumn, but also because I mentioned this fact on my YouTube short yesterday. Now, while for reasons that were laid out in that YouTube short, Americans prefer the term fall, I was surprised to find that the word autumn was pretty common among Americans. I don't know if this is a recent thing, like the whole country just woke up one morning and watched Lost in the Pond and thought to themselves, yes, we're changing things now. Or if it's just sort of always been here as an alternative to fall. And you might be thinking, ooh,
honestly, I don't really get this one, to be honest. Like, I call it autumn. Like, what?
Ooh, Lawrence, aren't there many surprising word alternatives that Americans use that Brits don't know about? And the answer to that is yes. I merely brought this one up so I could make that very point. This is undoubtedly a pandemic era thing, but I've seen an increasing number of Americans using the word jab to mean shot. I once worked with an American colleague who liked to use the word bonkers. So in part because of the internet, just as Britain is taking on quite a few Americanisms, I think the same is true in reverse, and it will be very interesting to look further into those details. And those are just a handful of myths that some Brits believe about America and Americans. Let me know in the comments some of the myths that you've had to dispel about this country. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on...
Wow, chat. Well, that was a very interesting video. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Make sure to go follow my Twitch. Don't forget, I'll see you there.